Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus A330 pilot, and in today's Simbrief tips and tricks I'm going to show you what to do when you get the dreaded flight exceeds aircraft range warning in Simbrief. Now this is obviously assuming that you are trying to plan a real-world flight operated by that airplane type and not something completely unrealistic like a 737 from Frankfurt to Honolulu. That is not going to work, I can tell you that much. Now, today we are going for a realistic flight, which is from Frankfurt to Cancun on an Airbus A330-300. So let's go ahead and plan that. So Frankfurt to Cancun, and our airplane type today is the Airbus A330-300. Now, by default, we will not really be able to make this. Let's just take a set amount of passengers as well. So we want to transport, let's say, 265 passengers today. If we hit the calculate and compare button and do our first calculation, then we can see that we need almost 10 tons more fuel than our airplane can carry. So we get the error over here, warning flight exceeds aircraft range, and we have to live with that at first. Now, let's go ahead and have a look into a couple of optimizations possible. We're going to start with the topic I dealt with previously, so I'm not going to go into too many details here, but that is our alternate planning. So, of the four alternates selected, Simbrief always gives you the furthest, which in our case is Fort Myers in Florida. Now, that is quite far away, so let's go ahead and select something that's a little bit closer, such as, for example, Cozumel Airport, which is located rather close by to Cancun. Obviously, weather needs to be good, so if we have a look into it, then we can see over here that the forecast for Cozumel is absolutely good, so we are going to keep this. It's rather close to Cancun, so we are not going to have too much extra fuel, but the goal today is to get us legally into the air. So Cozumel is an acceptable alternate down here. Now let's hit calculate and compare and see how much of a difference that is going to make. So we can see now that we're already 4,809 kilograms better, but we still need to get rid of 5,054 kilograms in order to make the flight possible. Now let's have a look into a couple of numbers that we can adjust. The first thing I notice over here is that for some reason Simbrief seems to prefer the scheduled flight time over the fuel usage. So that does make sense if the airplane is able to fly the flight, but it does not make sense if the airplane is not able to fly the flight on a high cost index. So looking at this, cost index 120 is obviously going to be rather expensive and costly in terms of fuel. So let's go ahead and select a manual cost index. Let's just go all the way down to cost index 0 and see what we're going to get. That is going to cause a much longer flight time, but if it makes us able to fly the flight in first place, it is absolutely worth accepting the longer flight time. As we can see over here, we are once again saving some additional fuel. We still need to get rid of 1,499 kilograms of fuel in order to make the flight possible. Also, we can see the effect of the reduction cost in it, which is 24 minutes extra flight time. So now we need a total of 12 hours 37 compared to 12 hours and 12 as we had with the higher cost index. But if that means we can get there in first place, then that is absolutely worth it in terms of the trade-off. Now, with that done, let's go ahead and generate an actual flight plan to see if we can find some room for further optimization. So let's have a look into it. We are going to assume that our route of flight is going to be fixed. So we will assume for this tutorial that we are not able to correct anything in terms of our routing over here. That is going to be assumed, fixed. Obviously, in the real world, the route would be the first thing you would work on. For example, over here, you can see Simbrief has planned us on the southernmost North Atlantic track, but that is still quite a distance from the Great Circle track. So depending on the weather, if we have a look at the significant weather chart over here, it might be possible to fly a little bit more southerly, and that might provide some better winds. But as you can see, it's planned us that up far to the north because of that jet stream over here, which otherwise we would be flying into. So that's the reason it planned us over there. But it might be worth for a real-world dispatcher to plant something in the middle of those two jet streams over here and see if flying down here might get us a little bit quicker flight time. That is worth trying, but for today, let's assume that the route of flight is fixed. So now let's go ahead and have a look into the actual flight plan and see if there is something we can do over here. So if we have a look into the fuel planning down here, we can see that we've been planned with 5% contingency fuel, which equals 38 minutes of flight time or 3,593 kilograms. So that is always something that we can shove a little bit off on. Now, contingency fuel, let's have a look into the basic definition. We can find it over here on the Skybrary, which is a very nice source for getting additional information on most topics aviation. So if we have a look at the definition of contingency fuel, we can see that according to ICAO Annex 6, the recommended minimum contingency fuel is the greater of 5% or the trip fuel or 5 minutes holding consumption at 1500 feet above destination field elevation. So that is the basic ICAO definition, and that is what we can see Simbrief has planned here as well. 5% contingency, which in case of a 12-hour 37 flight makes almost 40 minutes of flight time. But if we now continue reading on the Skybrary, then we can see that, however, some regulators have eliminated the minimum time requirement, and some have increased the recommended time interval in their national regulations, as well as some regulators allow for contingency fuel reduction to 3% of trip fuel or specific time requirements with use of en route alternates and conditional upon demonstrated performance criteria from the operator. So that is something that we're going to have a look at in practical examples now, because pretty much any operator uses that, and most national authorities have approved some sort of a program like this. Now we're going to have a look at what my airline is approved for, and that is three different options. We can do either 5% contingency or 5 minutes, whichever is greater, or we can do 3% contingency fuel, or we can do 20 minutes of contingency fuel. Now, let's have a look at what we're going to get when we calculate with those options. That means we got to go down in the Simbrief menu and have a look at the fuel planning options over here. You can see the first tab is contingency fuel. Now, if we have a look into that, then by default, I've selected 5% or 5 minutes. That is the default that I've programmed in my Simbrief, and you can change your default settings in Simbrief as well if you want to. However, 5% or 5 minutes is what is used on most short and medium haul flights, so that is the default setting that I did in my Simbrief. But today we want to explore the different options we have available. So let's go ahead and explore some of those options. Now, the next one we can take is 3%. So let's try 3% contingency fuel, hit calculate and compare, and then let's see what we are going to get in this example. And here we go. You can see that now we still get the error, but if we have a look over here, we are just missing 25 kilograms of fuel now. So that is certainly already a vast improvement, saving again almost 1,500 kilograms of fuel compared to the previous 5% regulation. So let's hit generate flight now and have a look at how much contingency we're actually carrying with this particular planning. And let's see if we may be able to optimize it a little bit further. So if we now have a look into the briefing preview, then we can see that now we've calculated with 3%, which is 23 minutes of flight time. So again, we can shove a little bit off. So let's go into edit flight once more and have a look at the last available option, which is 20 minutes of contingency fuel. Now, I'll go contingency fuel and we'll select 20 minutes down here. Now, let's hit calculate and compare and see what we're going to get this time. And here we go. No further restriction. We're able to operate the flight. Now, there is literally not much margin left for additional fuel that we could carry, but we've just about made it. So if we go ahead and hit the generate flight button now, let's have a look at how much extra fuel we could carry in the end. Some additional information while this is calculating, when you choose the either 3% or the 20 minutes options, then you need to plan with an en route alternate. Now, I will talk about en route alternates in a few moments, but at first let's have a look into how much margin we've got on this particular flight now. If you go down here, we can see that we're now planned with 20 minutes of fuel, which equals 1,893 kilograms by the Simbrief calculation. And if we have a look down here now, we can see that we can load a maximum of 363 kilograms of extra fuel. And that C over here indicates that we are limited by fuel tank capacity. As you can see, the capacity of the A330 tanks is 78,024 kilograms. Obviously, that is going to vary slightly depending on the density of the fuel, but overall, 78 tons is what you can carry in an A330, unless it has a center tank installed, which, however, the vast majority of the fleet that I'm operating on doesn't have. Only a few of them have it, and for reasons that are a topic of its own video, it's not really worth installing a center tank either, because as you can see, if we were not limited by the amount of fuel that we could carry, then we would be limited by the maximum takeoff weight of 233 tons. So for that reason, A330s tend not to have a center tank. All right, so I mentioned earlier that we need an en route alternate if we want to plan one of those fuel options. Now, in order for all of these to be done automatically, you can also select the EASA option. And when you select that already, you are already asked, would you like to automatically select an en route alternate? The answer is yes. Now, where do we need an en route alternate? The en route alternate basically needs to be 25% of our route before our destination within 20% of our route flight time. So that is that little circle that you see drawn on Simbrief over here. So the en route alternate needs to be located anywhere within here. Now, it's automatically selected Pittsburgh up there, and we can absolutely take it. Now, let's hit generate flight once more, and I just want to give you an idea of one further contingency fuel saving that you can do in the real world that Simbrief is unfortunately not capable of doing. And that is including part of the contingency fuel within the trip fuel. Now, when can you do that? Why can you do that? Well, a couple things over here. So I'm going to give you an example of a real-world flight operated on this route. And that flight was calculated with 20 minutes of contingency fuel as well, which turned out to be 1,861 kilograms. Now, just to give you an example of how accurate Simbrief actually is. For Simbrief, 20 minutes turns out to be 1,893 kilograms. So we're talking about 130 kilograms difference in fuel here. But obviously, the real world one is calculated using the actual performance factors of the aircraft, so slight differences are to be expected, even if we had exactly the same figures. All right, so part of the contingency fuel I mentioned can be included in the trip fuel. Why is that? Basically because that contingency is going to be burned off as you fly along. So you need to carry that additional fuel, and that burns additional fuel. And therefore, in the real world flight of the 1,861 kilograms contingency based on 20 minutes, they were able to include 528 kilograms in the actual trip fuel, reducing the additional fuel, so the contingency that actually needs to be carried, to 1,333 kilograms of fuel. And as you can see, that can very well make the difference between being able to fly the flight or not. Now, that is those little tricks for getting your flight planned. If Simbrief initially tells you that you were too heavy, obviously a real-world dispatch would now go ahead and increase the cost index in the planning so that they can reduce the delay until they actually reach the maximum takeoff weight. So they would exactly plan it out to the maximum, and that is what you would get. Now, that's going to be it for this video. I would like to thank you very much for watching. Hope that you learned something on this one and that you may have learned a couple of tricks. I do hope you did. And even if you did not, then do leave me your comments in the video description below to let me know what you think about this one and what we can do better, and if you've got any other tricks that you are using. I would like to say thank you very much for watching. Hope that you've enjoyed the video. If you're up for more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you all again on the next one.